Hello, and thank you so much for joining me today for the Sage Intacct Dynamic Allocations overview. My name is Linda Pinion, and I will be your host. Before we go into the solution, let's review a little bit around our agenda. We'll start out by talking about some of the challenges of dynamic allocations, and then we'll move right into what you'll see today in the solution presentation, followed up by some key takeaways. When we think about allocations, immediately what comes to my mind is, how did we do allocations a long time ago? Maybe the old-fashioned way. And allocations to me also meant it's the end of the month, and it's time to pull together all the information and create those journal entries. And for many companies and organizations, this is a time-consuming effort, making sure that all the entries have been pulled together, that they're accurate, that you're doing your math correctly, and more importantly, that you're getting all of those journal entries created. We all know that anytime we're in a manual situation, we run the risk of forgetting some information being incorrect or outdated. And at the end of the process, this is obviously a component of our month-end close. And going through these manual steps and checking and rechecking slows down our monthly close. Today, what I want to share with you is a relatively new solution, although I am going to say that dynamic allocations was released in R4 of 2018. So this solution has been around for the better part of a year plus. And as with anything that we have released, we have continued to make enhancements to the solution. We're going to start out by looking at some of the setup and configuration, because that's really the key to what makes this really shine for you, is setting up this configuration, getting everything in play, and then letting the solution really drive the value. We'll look at being able to do this across revenue and expenditures. We'll see that visibility into the automated journal entry. And then as a follow-up, the last thing I want to touch on is transaction allocations. I don't want to confuse you. However, I do want you to remember what transaction allocations are and how they work. And then today we're going to focus on that advanced way of allocating through dynamic allocations. Before we get into the solution, this is a great visual of what happens in dynamic allocations. And this is something that you may want to share with your team. After the fact, you may want to think about, how are we doing allocations today? Most of the time, a visual helps express and explain what's happening much easier than going into the software. So if we start over on the left-hand side, we have a source of money that in my terms has been collected over the course of the month. And we're going to use this allocation setup and configuration to determine the basis for that allocation and the target. And then we're going to produce a result. And that result is going to be a journal entry with drill down to the source and basis. So if you think about the two different ways that we can do allocations in Sage Intacct, the one way is a transaction allocation, which is done at the transaction entry point. So it's done at that line level where you are entering the transaction. Dynamic allocations is what I call after the fact. So all month long, we're posting entries into an account, and at the end of the month, we're going to take that pooled number. So again, go back to your money bag over here on the left. We're going to take all of that money together, and we're going to apply this allocation across that source. And we're going to do it with some intentional configuration. So the gist of this is we want to make sure that, one, we're adding value. More importantly, we're saving you time and we're reducing errors. And when we do that, we know that we also are getting a checkbox, a plus, if you will, on the audit side. So this is going to absolutely help you with your audit. So let's take a look at that in the solution. So I'm working today in a nonprofit environment, just as an example. However, we all know that dynamic allocations works across any type of company or organization. We're going to start out by looking at the allocation information. So prior to this, you would have gone in and subscribed to dynamic allocation. So it is a subscription, it is a separate SKU, and you would want to go into your company area, into your subscriptions, and subscribe. And then you're going to want to build out these allocations. And as you can see here, I've got one set up for other benefits. And what I'm doing here is I am determining how I want the dimensions to be allocated. So in this area, I have convenient drop-downs to answer how I want to use the dimensions within this allocation. And then I have a section here that is that source pool. So where is this information? Where are these dollars coming from? And for me, it's coming from a specific account group labeled Other Employee Benefits. And then I get to choose the percentage that I want to allocate and the book that I'm using and, of course, the time period. Now, I'm pointing to some dimension filters here. I'm utilizing my entity, or in this case, a fund if I was a nonprofit. And then I'm also using the department dimension. When I look at the basis here, I'm looking at an allocation method that is driven by the relative account financial. And I also am pointing to that account group, so that salary and wages expense. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull all of that information together, and then from here, I'm going to determine my target entry. So where is my journal that the allocation entry is going to be recorded? So I've set up a specific journal for that. We know that we have the ability to define our own journals. So I've set up an allocation journal specifically for that. And then you also have the ability to do some overrides. And once you set this up, it's really just a periodic review. So this is not something that you will need to go in and revisit every month, because once you set this up, then it's pretty much going to carry you forward. Now, you may need to set up some additional ones, which is perfectly understandable. But then when you run this process is going to create that journal entry. So let's take a look. You'll notice that I'm using the allocation book, and I'm posting into my allocation journal that I've created. And what you see here is a journal entry that has all of the detail attached so that I can see exactly what happened to these funds. So all month long, I've been posting into this one account, this other employee benefits, this 5127. I've been posting into this main site. And now what I'm doing is I am taking that shared amount, so I've set up a department for shared, and I am allocating this $2,031 back across these other departments. So it's really a very easy visual to understand that all month long, I'm going into one bucket. At the end of the month, based on my allocation configuration, so my basis, where I ask it to post, all of the information that we gave it in the setup, in that allocation information setup, that's what it's using to do this journal entry. So this is a journal entry that has been created automatically for me, and it also has that history, so you can see when it was created and you can see when it was posted. And for those of you who may be curious to know, of course, Collaborate is here as well. So if you had questions, you wanted to pop out and ask a question to one of your other colleagues about this transaction, you could use Sage Intacct Collaborate to do that. So being able to set up these allocations utilizing dynamic allocations is going to give you that automatic journal entry. Now, before we finish up today, I did want to take a quick look at transaction allocations. And let me be clear, we have always had transaction allocations. We've made an enhancement to those in the last quarter or two where we've added another option, and I'll share that with you. But a transaction allocation is one that allows you to set up a transaction rule, if you will, that you can then apply at the transaction entry time. So let me give you a simple example. This is one that I use a lot of times when I'm talking to folks who are currently using QuickBooks. Let's just say that I have 5 entities. So I'm keeping my books for 5 individual companies. We refer to them as entities. So I'm running multi-entity in Sage Intacct. I work with a marketing firm, and this marketing firm has sent me an invoice, and the invoice is for $2,500. Now, if I was still using QuickBooks, in order for me to distribute this invoice across all 5 of my companies, I would need to enter that invoice 5 times. So I'd log into a company, I would enter the invoice, enter their particular portion of that invoice, post it, and then log out, go to the next company, do the same thing. So it's basically the wash, rinse, repeat. 5 invoices I would enter instead of entering 1, which is what I would do in Sage Intacct. I would enter that 1 invoice, and then I would point to a transaction rule, and that transaction rule would be defined here, and it would define it as to how I wanted to split the transaction. So in my example, I would be splitting it, and I can split it by percentage, by fixed amount, or by fixed amount with an over and under logic. But in this case, I would probably do it by percentage, and I'd say each one of my entities needs to pay 20% of the bill. So I'd be spreading it equally across, and maybe I would do it based on an entity and a specific department, or as you can see, being a nonprofit, I've included department, fund, and project. The great news is, again, with these transaction allocations, you can do it to any one or more of the dimensions. So you get free reign as to how you want to set this up. Once you point to that transaction rule, that allocation at the entry level, Sage Intacct's going to do the math for you. So it's going to take that $2,500 and it's going to split it and apply it accordingly. So this is something that I want you to come away with today. There's really two different ways for you to do allocations. One is this transaction allocation. You have that today. If you're not using it, perhaps you want to go and read up on it and understand how you might be able to use that today. It's a setup. It's basically setup and configuration. In addition to that, you have the ability to utilize dynamic allocations. And dynamic allocations are going to give you that ability to do a pooled number, and then at the end of the month, automatically create that allocation based on your setup. And it's going to save you so much time because you won't have to gather that information. You won't have to do the math. You won't have to double check anyone's entries. It will automatically create those journal entries, post them in the journal that you've defined, and you will have all of that available for reconciliation, for your auditing, for any of the information that you need to go back and check. You've got a full audit trail. It's really going to give you the ability to have better analysis and better visibility to what's going on. At the same time, we know when we eliminate those manual processes, we're going to reduce errors. We're going to increase that auditability. And last, we're going to continue to be on that path to a continuous close. So this is going to be just another one of those areas that we're going to automate and streamline for you so that you are continuously closing. And this is going to give you a better picture of how your company or your organization is tracking. I want to thank you for your time today. And if you should have more questions, please make sure to get with your Sage Intacct representative. Thank you so much.